It is our privilege to live in a land as great as these United States. The greatness, power, and prestige of our nation has come from within, from our own people. But clouds of turmoil have continued to boil on our horizon, from the red-coated threat of the original 13 colonies to the red-shadowed war in Vietnam. But always America has brought forth a great statesman from her ranks to lead and speak out against these atrocities. Statesmen like Benjamin Franklin, Henry Clay, Jefferson Davis, and Robert E. Lee. These statesmen were born with the ability and desire to lead, and to reach such prominence is not an easy task. From the soft rolling hills of Barber County, Alabama, came such a man, destined to become a statesman. First as a page in the legislature of his state, then to serve as a representative of his people in the State House, then back home again as circuit judge. And then on a cold, wintry, windy day in January 1963, thousands of Alabamians cheered and America looked on as the Honorable George Corley Wallace accepted the challenge as governor of the state of Alabama.
Before I begin my talk with you, I want to ask you for a few minutes' patience while I say something that is on my heart. I want to thank those home folks of my county who gave an anxious country boy his first opportunity to serve in state politics. I shall always owe a lot to those who gave me that first opportunity to serve. I will never forget the warm support and close loyalty of the folks at Sutton's Store and Hegler's Mill, Eufaula, Beat 6 and Beat 14, Richard's Crossroads and Gamage Beat, at Baker Hill and Beat 8, Coma, Spring Hill, Adams Chapel and Mount Andrew, White Oak, Baxter Station, Clayton, Louisville and Cunningham Place, Horns Crossroads, Texasville, and Blue Springs, where the vote was 304 Wallace and 1 for the opposition. And the dear little lady whom I heard had made that one vote against me by mistake because she couldn't see too well and she had pulled the wrong lever. Bless her heart. At Clio, my birthplace and where I finished high school, and Elamville, I shall never forget them, and may God bless those good people forever. And I shall forever remember that election day morning as I waited, and suddenly at 10 o'clock that morning the first return of a box was flashed over this state. It carried the message, Wallace 15, opposition 0. And it came from Hamrick Beat at Putman's Mountain, where live the great hill people of our state. May God bless the mountain man. His loyalty is unshakable. He'll do to walk down the road with. This is the day of my inauguration as governor of the state of Alabama. And this day I feel a deep obligation to renew my pledges, my covenants with you, the people of this great state. General Robert E. Lee said that duty is the most sublime word in the English language, and I have come increasingly to realize what he meant. I shall do my duty to you, God helping. My pledge to you to stand up for Alabama is a stronger pledge today than it was the first day I made that pledge. I shall stand up for Alabama as governor of our state. You stand with me, and we together can give courageous leadership to millions of people throughout this nation who look to the South for their hope in this fight to win and preserve our freedom and liberty, so help me God.
Governor Wallace took his stand and found himself in great demand as a speaker. Invitations poured in from all over the nation. From north to south, people wanted to see and hear this man who dared to challenge the changing trends. Some came to jeer, but most stayed to cheer, as in Cincinnati, Ohio.
One of these days in the not-too-distant future, you and I are going to get together. That when we do get together, there's going to be a lot of repercussions all the way from here to Washington, D.C. You know, I've traveled recently in the last number of months all the way up to Dartmouth in New Hampshire, and then all the way to Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, in the west. And I have found that people all over this country are themselves concerned about the omnipotent rush of centralized governmental control over the lives of the people of our country. And I want you liberals, if there are any of you here tonight, to think on this point. Where there are no property rights, there are no human rights. And in the countries of this world in which there are no property rights at all are countries like Communist China and Soviet Russia. No property rights. And there are no human rights. And Mao Zedong, he ran, what did he run for? He ran as an agrarian reformer. He was going to help everybody. He was going to help the farm people. But of course he wound up starving 13 or 14 million of them to death once he got to power. No property rights in those countries. The only place that you have human rights, my young friends, are those countries in which the ownership of private property is sacred. No other country in the world today is there any human right. The right to assemble freely and to speak freely. Trial by jury. Unlawful search and seizure is prohibited. Unless it's a country in which the ownership of private property is sacred itself and held so by the law. And I hope that you will think about that as you hear people in the propaganda on the national radio and television media always talking about human rights. The ownership of private property is a human right. And Abraham Lincoln said, and I'd like to read from him, because a lot of the liberals are quoting Abraham Lincoln now, but I'd like to quote, but they're not quoting all that he said, because if they quoted all that he said, he'd be picketed out here tonight. But they only quote that part of Abraham Lincoln that suits their own taste and style. But here's what he said about property, quote, property is desirable, is a positive good in the world. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built. Yes.
Yes, as the governor said, he traveled from east to west, from north to south, and now to the great Magnolia State of Mississippi.
And I'm sure that this overflow crowd here tonight, and this Coliseum here in one of the most beautiful cities in the United States, Jackson, Mississippi, I'm sure this overflow crowd is shaking the eye teeth of the liberals as they were shaken in many other parts of the country recently. So I don't know whether we're going to get maybe the coverage in our campaign that we ought to get, because the national press as a whole, not individually, has not seen fit to report truthfully that which we feel and that which we advocate here in this state and in my state. I was invited to the National Press Club the other day to speak in Washington, D.C. They said they had the largest crowd since Khrushchev spoke there. But I saw where the president the other day said he's not going to recommend that I get the traditional certificate of appreciation for having spoken to the National Press Club. But Khrushchev and Castro spoke, and they gave them the traditional certificate of appreciation. And they have probably brought as much suffering and as much misery and as much death to friends of ours and our own American flyers as any two people in this generation. So since they gave Mr. Khrushchev and Mr. Castro a certificate of appreciation, As far as I am personally concerned, they can take that traditional certificate and they know what they can do with it.
The nation now seemed to be waking and looking for a leader. The trips from the liberal Ivy League colleges of the Atlantic to the restless waters of the Blue Pacific seemed to stir an interest. So the presidential preferential primaries against overwhelming odds.
So they don't want you to get in national life. They just want you to stay home. And if I had stayed home and hadn't gone to Wisconsin, where when we got up there they said you won't get 10,000 votes. And lo and behold, with them counting them, we got nearly 300,000. I don't know how many we would have gotten if I could have helped them count them. And then we went on to Indiana and to Maryland, got on to Maryland, the whole United States Senate come over there speaking against us. I just up there speaking a few days around to a few good people. And some of the folks that criticized me in the state, they ought to have been up there helping me. You sent me your telegrams and your prayers and your petitions and your money. And you were with me in spirit, but some of these politicians ought to have been up there helping me. But they wasn't up there. They were back home making fun of it. But then we got 44% of the vote in about 10 days in a state 1,000 miles away from here. And you know, I was winning up until 10 o'clock that night. But then they had what they called a recapitulation of the vote. And 2 hours later, they said upon a recapitulation of the vote, Governor Wallace has slid below 50%. Well, you know, I don't know what this recapitulation is, but better watch anybody starts to recapitulate on you. You wind up getting in trouble.
Why would a Southern governor attempt to enter national politics? In Marlow Heights, Maryland, Governor Wallace explained.
So I come here to this state not to run a racist campaign. I have not made one statement in this state or any other state recommending to you any social and educational order. Because everybody that I have seen in the sovereign state of Maryland are intelligent people. And therefore you don't need anyone to advise you about local matters, because you are intelligent enough to determine the policy of the schools in your fine county and in your cities and in your state without any interference from the people of Alabama or from social engineers in Washington, D.C.
After the phenomenal showing in the 3 states he entered, this statesman knew that he must somehow continue this program. But the state of Alabama had laws against secession. But he petitioned the legislature to let the people speak.
Ladies and gentlemen of the television and radio audience, and you here who are today of this joint session, what is a succession bill? It is a bill that would allow the people of Alabama to vote upon whether or not they would like to see a governor have the chance to run again. This succession bill also applies to every other constitutional officer in this state, including the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the state auditor, the commissioner of agriculture. It also would remove the limitation upon a governor not being able to run for the United States Senate until a year has expired from the time he has concluded his term in office. This bill is a bill that would allow the people of Alabama to vote upon this matter. It is not something that the legislature of Alabama can put upon the people. It would be a voice and vote of the people of Alabama.
But by lengthy filibusters and the staunch opposition of a few, the secession bill was killed. Now, how could the Wallace program that had been so beneficial to the state and the nation be continued? The answer came and shocked the nation. He would enter his wife into the governor's race. The question now was, could this gracious and beautiful lady, who had served so well in the governor's mansion, adapt to the complexities of a statewide political campaign? It was not to be an easy task, and the decision to run came out of love and devotion to her state, her nation, and her husband. And in the words of this lady, known to thousands as Lurleen, the decision was reached after prayerful consideration. But the answer as to her ability came early in the campaign.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to come back to Andalusia, where I campaigned actively for my husband in 1958 and 1962. I'm back this time campaigning for myself as a candidate for governor of the state of Alabama. Doing this in order that we might continue to carry on the policies of this present administration. My election as governor will make it possible for the people to continue to enjoy the type of administration that has been endorsed by the overwhelming majority of the people of our state. This administration has been characterized by honesty and progress, and I'm proud of the achievements that our state government has made in Andalusia and our home section of South Alabama. This great section of Alabama will continue to have an administration that will recognize the growing needs for roads, improvement in education, and the need for more industry in this section. Our administration will continue an active industrial development program that has seen more industry come to and expand in Alabama during the last 3 years than during the previous 10 years. Our administration will continue to voice over the country the need for an awakening to the dangers of the trends that, unless they are checked, will destroy all local government, the property ownership system, and individual liberty and freedom. My pledge to you is that I will continue, with my husband's help, the same kind of state government you have experienced in the last 3 years, and we will continue to stand up for Alabama. And may I now at this time present to you the man who will be my #1 assistant, my husband and your governor, George C. Wallace.
And the governor always followed his wife to the platform to explain why she was in the governor's race.
I want to say a word on behalf of my wife, who is a candidate for governor, and I'll tell you some of the reasons why. Of course, I was a little disturbed yesterday when I heard that the St. Louis Post-Dispatch came out against her, and the Minneapolis, Minnesota Times, and I believe the Seattle Post. I wish the Life magazine could see this crowd tonight. I read the other day where they disturbed about it. Want to know what I was going to do if my wife was elected governor? Besides helping to run the state government, I'll say this for the Life magazine's benefit. I'm going to draw the water and tote in the wood and wind the clock and put out the cats. I reckon it'll be all right. Well, maybe that's...
Was Lurleen qualified to become Alabama's first lady governor? Yes, said Governor Wallace.
That being a good governor, 95% of it's being honest. And anybody out in this audience tonight would make a good governor if they were elected governor, if their mind was set on doing what was right for the people of our state. And we've tried to do right. And we're going to run on our reputation and our record. And I do appreciate the opportunities that you gave me. And we've always said that we wanted to be able to let people in other parts of the country know what we stood for. We're not against any of our people, but we want someday to see local government returned. And you're never going to get it returned, and I know as well as anyone, unless we carry on this matter throughout the nation and other parts of the country.
The long and hard primary campaign continued, but spirits were high and the governor joked.
Well, I want to let y'all on something now that I haven't told you, and all you married folks know what I'm talking about. My wife's been running that show anyway up there for the last 3 years. She just agreed to let me help her during the next 4 years.
And joked again.
But I'm reminded of a joke when I think about us up here. Right during the close of the war between the states, they want to call it the Civil War now, but the war between the states, an old Confederate soldier was on a hill, and he looked down and saw a regiment of Union soldiers. And he said, "I'm about whooped." He said, "Come on up and get me." And so the major of the Union regiment said, 4 of you go get him." And the 4 went up the hill, and they never came back. And so the major said, 8 of you go get him. And the 8 went, and they never came back. And then the major said, when the old Confederate soldier came back on the hill, said, "Come on up and get me. I'm not too tough." The major said, "The whole regiment go up and get him." So the whole regiment went up, and they never came back. And so the major said, "I'll go get him myself." And as he went up the hill, one of the soldiers came rolling down the hill, blood spattered and bruised and his clothes torn off of him, and he grabbed the major by the leg. And he said, "Major, don't go up there." And the major said, "Why?" He said, "It's a trap." He said, "What do you mean a trap?" He said, there ain't one of them up there, there's two of them up there.
But campaigning is really serious business, and this one had national implications.
But even though we oppose trends in our country, and we're going to keep on doing it, not only within Alabama but without, we still defend our nation's servicemen in Vietnam. And I'm proud to say that the college students in our state have no organizations to raise money and blood and clothes for the enemies of our country like we find on many college campuses. And when I was in California not long ago, a man was speaking and got a standing ovation from 10,000 students when he said, let's organize a freedom brigade and go and fight the American forces and fight the imperialists of this country, fight our own soldiers. Sometimes I wish they'd organize that brigade and get all the bearded beatniks that march in these shindigs and get them over there and let them do a little fight and we'd get rid of them. I think that's the best way to get rid of them.
To win, you must continue to fight, and Governor Wallace asked the help of his people.
So I say to you that we can win someday, because we are not alone, and you know that. The Lou Harris poll shows that. You want us to continue, we'll continue. If you don't want us to, as I said a moment ago, we'll thank you for having let us serve you. And if you'll elect my wife the governor of the state, we will continue to be able to stand up in places all over our country and say this: I come from a state whose people are just as refined and cultured and intelligent and righteous as the people of any state in this union, and don't you ever forget it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
The people spoke, and Mrs. George C. Wallace was elected the Democratic nominee in the state of Alabama, over 9 male opponents by overwhelming odds. But the affairs of state were still at hand, and the tentacles of federal tyranny were still outstretched, this time in the form of guidelines of health, education, and welfare. And again, it was left for Governor Wallace to stand alone.
It is necessary that we be here tonight and to bring to the attention of the people of our state a blueprint devised by socialists, which has as its objectives the capture and regimentation of our children and the destruction of our public education system. We are going to propose a plan to combat this socialistic scheme. The fact that this blueprint was drawn up by politicians seeking power and is being imposed by bureaucrats in their hire does not lessen its socialistic and alien origin. It has the unqualified 100% support of the Communist Party USA, as well as all of its fronts, affiliates, and publications. The blueprint is commonly called the Guidelines.
In his address to the combined houses of the legislature and a packed gallery and thousands more on radio and television, Governor Wallace continued his attack on the Guidelines.
As J. Edgar Hoover has said, the aim of communism, the primary aim, is to capture our youth. He is talking about your children and my children, ladies and gentlemen. It is that boy and that girl that live in our homes. They are the target. They are meant to have taken from them the beautiful spirituality of love and have it replaced with degeneracy, the thrilling pride of patriotism, the character of duty, the devotion to God, and the deep satisfaction of accomplishment that you and I have had ought to be ground out of them by a social system administered by bureaucrats, presided over by power politicians, and originated by atheistic concepts contrary to the American system. The pawns of sacrifice ought to be our children, and the reward for their betrayal is to be federal money. In our hearts, we cannot believe that mortal man, once understanding the implications of what is asked of him, can accept the 30 pieces of silver in exchange for his children. you will be asked to declare that the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare are illegal and that those guidelines are null and void in this great state of Alabama. We ask this to relieve the school boards of the threats, the intimidations, and the blackmail of the quasi-secret agents of health, education, and welfare who are attempting to buy and threaten away the rights of our local people, rights which men are dying today for in Asia and for which men have died in wars past. We ask this so that Alabama may take a historic step as an example that we hope other states will take and which eventually all states must take if we ought to save our nation from central tyranny.
After the now famous guideline speech, the man who stood alone was joined by many, including some Northern liberal senators who also asked that these guidelines be further examined. Even as one race for governor was over, for the lovely First Lady of the state of Alabama, still another was to begin. For the first time since Reconstruction, candidates faced more than token opposition in the general election. But by now, Lurleen B. Wallace was a poised and seasoned campaigner.
There is only one way I can adequately express the depth of our appreciation to you for your tremendous display of support. That is to promise you that we are going to continue to provide the type of state government which you so overwhelmingly endorsed on May 3rd. We are extremely grateful to those of you who have sacrificed your time to demonstrate your support of the Wallace administration here tonight. We're glad to see our friends from throughout the state who have come to stand with us for Alabama. We are equally grateful to those who could not be here tonight. Some of you are senior citizens. Some of you are ill. We have your letters, and we know you are with us in spirit. Let me assure you that we will increase the programs upon which you depend, the assistance your long years of labor and sacrifice have earned. Those of you listening on radio in the mills, factories, and plants of Alabama, we are keenly aware of your support. We know you could not be present tonight, but we also know that you will be with us on November 8th, and we will be with you. We will continue with your support to provide better schools, better roads, more job opportunities, higher wages, and a better life for the working people of Alabama. We are truly grateful for the wonderful vote given to us on May 3rd, and your outpouring of support tonight indicates that it will be even more conclusive on November the 8th. As you know, there is tremendous national interest in this election. The representatives of major television networks, big newspapers, and magazines are here tonight. Although many of them have painfully distorted the truth about our state, people throughout America, like you, have the ability to read between the lines. This was proven in Wisconsin, Indiana, and Maryland. Citizens citizens of those states and every other state are anxiously awaiting the outcome of the Alabama election. They are looking to Alabama because you have provided them hope for a return to the principles of honest, efficient, economic government responsive to the will of the people. Some of the newspapers ridicule this idea, but those of you who have visited in other states and who have come in contact with travelers to Alabama know this is true. The often heard comment, "Thank God for Alabama," is filled with meaning. It sums up the fact that the American people, whether they live in Alabama or New York or Ohio, are tired of being told by editors and by bureaucrats that they do not have intelligence enough to run their own affairs. People in every state in this union look to Alabama because we have the courage to say that we are capable of running our affairs. And we will say it again, loud and clear, on November the 8th.
Yes, this election did have national implications. And again, Governor Wallace followed his wife to the Speaker's rostrum to appeal for continued support.
People all over the nation are now taking hope. We say to them tonight, no, we shall not trade our movement for a counterfeit doctrine erected by the liberals in New York. We say to them that we, the people, have brought about the birth of this movement with the sweat of our brows, with the energies of our bodies, with the faith of our souls, and with the devotion to our principles. And we shall continue. We shall continue until the fresh air of our cause becomes the prevailing wind in America. We shall continue until our Constitution is restored. We shall continue until the communist debris is swept clean from our streets and our civilization is secure and bright and promising for our children. We ask you tonight, once again, to call your neighbors together, to plan and to get others to go to that polling place on November 8th, and let them hear of our determination once again around the world. We have kept the faith with you. Where you have sent us, we have gone. And where you send us, we shall go again. If it is in God's will and the determination of the Alabamian, then the road to victory lies before us. For the sake of our Constitution and our children, we cannot shirk that duty nor fail that victory. Thank you very much, my fellow Alabamians.
People went to the polls in record numbers on November 8th, and Alabama spoke to the rest of the nation and elected the first woman in the history of the state by a majority never before afforded a gubernatorial candidate. The Wallace program will continue by the will of the people. And as her number one advisor stands by her side, Mrs. George C. Wallace will stand up for Alabama and America. And the world has not heard the last from the outspoken fighter for the rights of all our people. The statesman, small of stature and large in the hearts of many Americans, will carry on the fight at home and across the country. And the word losing is not in his vocabulary. May long be the life of this Wallace team, so that our government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
We will eventually win because we see evidence every day. Look at our progress. Allies in support in California, Nebraska, Illinois, Wisconsin, Maryland, and all across this nation. Yes, they have taken many of our freedoms away from us, but they are paying dearly for every inch. They are losing the support of the people of the United States simply because Alabama, yes, Alabama, did not sit down and surrender quietly. A national movement is growing which will sweep the destroyers of our nation from office, that will reap out the roots of tyranny from our federal system, that will restore our Constitution and our law and our order and our freedom. It would be much easier for us not to come here tonight. It would be much easier to surrender our freedoms quietly and our children with them. But you, the people of Alabama, have always kept faith with us, and we, the legislature and your governor, will not break faith with you. We have come here again to stand up for you. The people of this country look to us for leadership, and they are going to get it. The fierce and independent spirit of Alabamians is today a legend across this nation. Many of you who have traveled outside this state have heard the voices of the people in other states who have said to you, thank God for Alabama. Your governor and your legislature appreciate your continued support. This nation already honors your courage, your love of freedom, and your faith and devotion. And I again say, stand up for Alabama and stand up for America.